Hello and welcome back to Iridescent Grooves, or welcome for the first time if you haven't been here before. I'm back with a new season, and for the first time I'll be posting to YouTube as well as Spotify. So if you want to watch along instead, head over there at the link in the description. I took a little break and didn't finish up my spooky season series, but I will revisit the stories that I had left through this next season. Today we're going to be talking about the 14-Hour Technicolour Dream, a counterculture event that was organised to raise funds for the International Times paper. I'll add songs related to this episode to our companion playlist, which you'll find at the link in the description. Before we get into the main event of the festival, we need to start with John "Hoppy" Hopkins. He was born John Victor Lindsay Hopkins, Hoppy for short, and was a photographer, journalist, researcher and political activist. He was one of the best-known underground figures of the swinging London scene. Hoppy went to Cambridge University through a scholarship and graduated in 1958 with a degree in physics and mathematics. He went on to work as a lab technician for the Atomic Energy Research Establishment at Harwell in Oxfordshire. But after a trip to Moscow where he attended a communist youth festival, he had his security clearance revoked. This is when, at the beginning of 1960, he relocated to London. He worked as a photographer for various newspapers and music magazines, including The Guardian, Melody Maker, Jazz News and Peace News. Through this, he was taking photos of all the big names, including the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, R&B artists like Muddy Waters, Sister Rosetta Tharpe and John Lee Hooker, but he also visited more alternative or darker areas of London, for the sensibilities of the time, taking photos of tattoo parlours, bikers, prostitutes, fetishists and the derelict architecture of the time. By the mid-1960s, Hoppy was pretty central in the emerging underground scene in London. He was recording peace marches, poetry readings and happenings, and taking photos of counterculture figures including Allen Ginsberg and Malcolm X. He created something of a yellow pages or a who's who for the underground scene, collecting the names, contact details and interests of all the most happening people. He then copied these and distributed them among the movers and shakers, greatly boosting the underground movement. In March 1966, Hoppy, together with Ruan Laslit, founded the London Free School. The London Free School was inspired by American Free Universities and the Victorian Jewish Free School in Spitalfields. It was a community action adult education project. The organisers, including Hoppy and Ruan, were a coalition of New Left, which was a political movement of activists that campaigned for social issues, including feminism, gay rights and drug policy reforms, and the rejection of traditional family values, social order and gender roles. And CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament housing activists, and the new beatnik hippie generation. The formation of the London Free School also led to the first outdoor Notting Hill Carnival. There had been previous indoor events which Ruan had been unaware of when she proposed the outdoor festival. The indoor event was a Caribbean carnival held in 1959, organised by Claudia Jones, often described as the mother of the Notting Hill Carnival. This indoor event was televised by the BBC and was in response to the race relations in the UK at the time, the high level of racist attacks and the Notting Hill race riots that had happened the year prior. Ruan's aims for the festival were for the different cultural groups of Notting Hill to learn more about each other's customs, to bring more colour and life to the streets, and to counter the perception that the area was a run-down slum. The Notting Hill Fair and Pageant, or the London Free School Fair, was held over a week and culminated in a parade attended by around 1,500 people, according to police figures. Ruan borrowed costumes from Madame Tussauds, a local hairdresser did hair and makeup for free. There were floats from the Gas Board and the Fire Brigade, and horse and carts from the Portobello Market. The parade included London Irish Girl Pipers, a West Indian marching band, Ginger Johnson's African-Cuban band, and Russell Henderson's Trinidadian Steel Band. There had also been an early Pink Floyd show as part of the Notting Hill Fair at the All Saints Church Hall, as well as a series of fundraising concerts by them for the London Free School. These were among the earliest shows by the Floyd and led to their later residency at the UFO Club and touring further afield. As well as the Notting Hill Carnival, the London Free School also led to the founding of the UFO Club. That was established by Hoppy and Joe Boyd. Joe Boyd had been involved in LFS but was also a music producer. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts and raised in Princeton. He produced Arnold Lane and the B-side Candy in a Currant Bun for Pink Floyd, as well as many other works for many other artists through the years. Although short-lived, the UFO Club was an extremely important part of the counterculture scene, with Pink Floyd and Soft Machine among the house bands. A young David Bowie would talk about seeing Pink Floyd at the UFO Club and talked about how much Syd Barrett had influenced his music in those early days. Mark Bolan would also tell a similar story about seeing Pink Floyd at the UFO Club and how influential he had found it as well. He was heavily inspired by Syd in those days. The UFO Club would have light shows, poetry readings, new up-and-comers, big names like Jimi Hendrix and Jeff Beck, and avant-garde art performances from artists such as Yoko Ono. And the newspaper International Times, or IT, came from LFS as well. Hoppy was one of the editors. Other editors included David Merowitz, Roger Hutchinson, Peter Stansel, Barry Miles, Jim Haynes, and playwright Tom McGrath, and other guest editors. Some of the contributors to it later became prominent names in the UK, including Jermaine Greer, DJ John Peel, poet and social commentator Jeff Nuttall, and occultist Kenneth Graham. And there were original contributions from underground writers such as William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, the latter of whom would also help fund the paper, as did Paul McCartney through his friendship with Barry Miles. The International Times found itself a target for the police, due perhaps to their counterculture roots and the sex, drugs and rock and roll contributions that would be offensive to the sensibilities of the mainstream. Their offices were regularly raided by the police who wanted to try and shut them down, so they needed funds to keep running and for their legal fees. This targeting by the police carried on through the 60s and into the 70s, when they were actually convicted for running contact ads for gay men. This shut the paper down until it was picked up for a short run by a different publisher. As an aside, Hoppy would also be convicted in 1967 of keeping premises for smoking cannabis and possession of cannabis. The judge described him as a pest to society, and he was sentenced to 9 months in prison, and would end up serving 6 months in Wormwood Scrubs. This led to a free Hoppy movement, including a full-page ad in the Times, clandestinely at the time funded by Paul McCartney, in tribute to Hoppy, which described the current drug laws as immoral in principle and unworkable in practice, which was signed by Francis Crick, George Melly, Jonathan Miller and the Beatles. Back to the foundation of International Times. Amusingly, the logo was a photo of vampish silent movie actress Theda Bara. They had wanted to use a photo of Clara Bow, who was the original It Girl, but they used Theda Bara by accident. They had their launch party on the 15th of October 1966 at an all-night rave at the Roundhouse, featuring Soft Machine and Pink Floyd. Those attending were promised a pop-op, costume, mask, fantasy loon, blowout drag ball, whatever that means, with steel bands, trips, strips, happenings and movies. David Allen of Soft Machine described the launch as one of the 2 most revolutionary events in the history of English alternative music and thinking. The IT event was important because it marked the first recognition of a rapidly spreading socio-cultural revolution that had its parallel in the States. Now, the raids in early 1967 precipitated the organising of the 14-hour Technicolour Dream. They were raided up until April, and the concert was arranged for the 29th of April. It was essentially a fundraising event, but it grew into a free speech benefit, as described by Mike McInerney, who was the art editor of International Times and designed the iconic poster for the Technicolour Dream. The 14-hour Technicolour Dream was held in the Great Hall of Alexandra Palace. There were 2 main stages at either end of the hall, with a small central stage for dancers, poetry readings and other performances. They hired a helter-skelter from a local fairground, so if you wanted to ride a helter-skelter while you're probably self-medicating, you could do that. There was a light tower in the centre of the hall to project light shows, strobe effects and films. They had stalls, people in harlequin costumes, acrobats and jugglers, as well as tarot readings and fortune-telling. You could also enjoy some candy floss as you went round. It must have been quite a trip, literally. Mike McInerney recalls a relaxed and comfortable feeling of being amongst family and friends, a congregation rather than an audience. Despite a brief scuffle at one of the ticket booths by a group of mods, which seems to be the only trouble that I can find actually on the night, although after the event, Hoppy and Dave Howson would have to chase missing ticket sales and ticket sellers who clearly weren't tuned into the vibe of the show. The Queen and the Prime Minister were invited to attend for free, but the rest of the attendees were charged £1 a ticket. Performers appeared for free, including the exploding Galaxy Ballet Company, who choreographed a performance called Fuzz Death for the event. Fuzz meaning authority and authority figures in general, but specifically the police. John Lennon attended the show with his friend John Dunbar after they saw an advert for the event mid-trip and thought it would be a good idea to go. They arrived in John's iconic Rolls-Royce. John Dunbar's Indica Gallery had hosted Yoko Ono's art show that John Lennon had attended the year before, which was his and Yoko's first meeting. Yoko was at the Dream as well. She was overseeing a performance of her cut piece. This was an art performance that she usually did herself, which involved her standing still while onlookers could cut pieces from her clothes, either in small snips or large swathes, depending on the bravado, I guess, of the individual. John Lennon was said to be captivated by this piece, but didn't get to meet Yoko. Although their paths were not destined to cross on this occasion, it wouldn't be long before their love affair would begin. There was a rumour that Jimi Hendrix was in attendance as well, but there doesn't seem to be any actual proof. And given the amount of substances being imbibed on the night, I'm sure recollections would be hazy. But given that the event was so huge, it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that he was aware it was happening, and could have attended. There was a long list of bands playing the show, including Soft Machine, John's Children featuring a pre-T-Rex Mark Bolan, The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, The Move, The Pretty Things and Pete Townsend. Andy Ellison of John's Children would shower the crowd with feathers from a feather pillow from the stage, while Mark would stalk the stage seemingly quite morose. The headliners were Pink Floyd. This was pre-Piper at the Gates of Dawn, but they were working on the songs that would be recorded for the album, including Astronomy Domini and Interstellar Overdrive, as well as Arnold Lane and Nick's Boogie. They were actually pretty tired when they got to Ali Pali at around 3 a.m, as they had already played a show that night in the Netherlands, and travelled back to make it in time to perform at the Dream. Sid was also fairly heavily medicated, which didn't help. They got on stage around 5 a.m, and the pink light of the sunrise reflected off Sid's mirrored guitar, which sounds pretty dreamy to me, but it seems that Sid wasn't really up to it. So Roger had to step in and take over, according to Chris Beard of the Purple Gang, who had played earlier and was now able to watch the other bands. Sid spent a large portion of their performance stood facing his amp and sliding his Zippo up and down the fret of his guitar. David Allen recalled the eerie vibe of the end of their set and how it seemed that Sid wasn't really there. The sun soon rose, spelling the end of the Dream. There were people outside Ali Pali on the grassy bank enjoying the sun, and an open-back truck arrived and distributed bread and bananas to everyone still present. The Dream was recorded by Peter Whitehead, and the footage appeared on his Pink Floyd London 1966-67 film. However, the funds that should have been raised were lacking due to money either not being collected or going missing. Hoppy said the 14-hour Technicolour Dream was a big event and a financial disaster. Most people were on drugs of one sort or another. It was a crest of a wave. It wasn't fully understood, but it was a landmark event. As well as Peter Whitehead's film, the event was also captured for an episode of the documentary and current affairs show Man Alive, a BBC show that ran from 1966 to 1981 that covered social and political issues both at home and abroad. The full episode, titled What Is a Happening, is on YouTube, and I've used some clips here on the video version of the podcast. I can only imagine what it would have felt like to be there at the time. The sights and sounds. It must have been a cacophony of sounds echoing in the hall, with multiple bands playing on the two stages, the light shows and movie scenes projected, and the helter-skelter to top it off, as well as the acrobats and harlequins. It must have felt like the ultimate psychedelic dream. Hoppy continued his work after his time in prison. The following year, him and Barry Miles converted it into a workers' cooperative, and he started BIT, an information service, and he continued to review and give advice on drugs in it under the pseudonym Bradley Martin. He later formed Fantasy Factory with his partner Sue Hall, and in 1990 he designed and built a greenhouse for horticultural research at the University of Westminster. This information on his later life I've paraphrased from his obituary written by Joe Boyd for The Guardian, so I recommend you Google that and have a read. Hoppy was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2007 and he passed away on the 30th of January 2015. Thank you for joining me on this adventure through the psychedelic counterculture of swinging London. I hope you found this interesting. It's been an enjoyable one for me to put together, and I think it makes for a groovy start to season 2 of the podcast. I'll add songs to the companion playlist so you can listen to them after the episode. You can find the link in the description of this episode, and you can also find the links to my other socials. And I will see you next time.